Dear Sarah, it is a lovely Tuesday evening. I've just finished procrastinating and I have no more reason not to do this vlog. So today I'd like to talk about Thursday's reading on Sir John Harrington. But before we do that, I should probably talk about why I decided to do a vlog. A huge part of it is just that I thought it'd be a lot of fun. And I find that in general, vlogs are more accessible to more people. I personally find vlogs much easier to absorb than articles or blog posts, for example. So about Sir John Harrington, you mentioned in class that this guy invented the toilet. So apparently back then, you could both write poetry and invent bodily fluid disposal machines. Now, that's kind of a weird combination, and I have to wonder that if by association, does that mean toilets are poetic, or is poetry crappy? Personally, I think I'd prefer the former. And a little bit more food for thought, was this guy knighted because of his poetry, or because of his toilets? Regardless of his multifaceted background, let's get down to some business. From what I can tell, this is in a lot of ways a mini version of Sir Philip Sidney's defense of poesy. I mean, it comes to a lot of the same conclusions through the same arguments. I want to focus on two main points in his essay. The first is his purpose for poetry, which is essentially to make people better, similarly to Sidney. He says that it is to soften and polish the hard and rough dispositions of men and make them capable of virtue and good discipline. But then Harrington concedes that poetry is vain and useless in relation to heavenly matters because everything on earth will eventually turn to dust. However, he does actually defend poetry because even though it's not biblical, it's still imperfectly moral, and more importantly, it's accessible to a whole lot more people. It essentially addresses the vulgar and immoral majority and introduces them to virtue in ways that theology and apologetics can't. I guess you could say it's like a gateway drug to morality. So we've come back to the idea of accessibility. Could poetry be the vlog of the Elizabethan era? The second thing I want to talk about is his definition of poetry. His definition consists of two parts. It must be fiction and it must be verse. It's slightly different from Sidney's definition, which, if I recall correctly, was that it just had to be fiction, didn't necessarily have to be verse. I think, this is a pretty reasonable definition of poetry because it includes both content and form. Not only that, but according to him, the content of poetry consists also of layers. The first layer is just the literal what's going on in the poem. The second one, which is the more interesting one really, is all the moral and religious implications of that literal sense. Now, I think I can probably get behind this. I mean, in English we always talk about deciphering poems and going deeper into the real meaning of poetry and whatnot. But here it almost seems like he's taking an elitist position on poetry, that you need to be enlightened or you need to be noble to understand poetry truly. Which doesn't make a whole lot of sense with the accessibility of poetry he was talking about earlier. I'm not totally certain what to make of it. Might want to raise the question during class. All in all, interesting essay, pretty similar to Sidney's, and I'd love to know your thoughts on it. That's all for me. Sarah, I'll see you on Thursday.